But that brings us to the backup point guard, who is Tre Jones, who had
Mm.
a really solid end to last season. And I think I'll just dish it to you to start off here. We're just hoping that he can continue the flashes that we saw at the end of the season.
Right, that end of the season run was great for him, and the thing that I think is a guarantee from Tre Jones is under control play, again, facilitating. A lot of his strengths will be the same as CP3. He just doesn't have the experience or the elite IQ of a Hall of Fame point guard yet. Maybe eventually he can get to that point, but CP3 is in a class of his own. But I think if he can continue to make strides as a three-point shooter, just a spot-up shooter, he showed us flashes of that. Like you said, he was in the high 30% range for us and became a consistent shooter. If he can continue that for a full year, then he will be an outstanding backup. And I think where he struggled early last year was coming in off the bench because, like you said, he didn't have an elite scorer or a guy that could go one-on-one in isolation situations to take some of the ball pressure off of himself. And he can't necessarily create his own shot. I think our new bench unit, where he will have more weapons around him for an entire season and an entire offseason, will kind of alleviate some of that struggle. I'm thinking guys like Keldon Johnson. He'll have Zach Collins next to him as well. Stephon Castle and maybe Malachi Brandon, maybe Blake Wesley. Who knows who that last guy is in that rotation, or Mamu Kelashvili. But either way, the cohesiveness of that second unit should be more fluid coming into the year, which will alleviate some of that struggle. And his defensive struggle, I think, will always be there just because of his size and athleticism. But if he can learn from Chris Paul as far as being a communicator, like we just talked about, and being a connective piece defensively, then we won't necessarily have to worry about that as much. I know he doesn't have an elite shot blocker behind him like Chris Paul will in that starting lineup, but I think Tre has the tools, and he's even a little bit more physical than Chris Paul. So if he can learn some of those traits, I think that will be less of a struggle for him.
And I believe Tre Jones is another guy who's still just 24 years old. Let me double check that. I believe he's 23, 24. Around that range. Yes, so 24 years old. So, I mean, that's another guy who's just entering his prime.
Right.
I know it's been a struggle over these past 2 seasons, but you've got to remember the context as well. I think, you hit on pretty much everything that I was thinking as well there, Ethan. The biggest thing for me is, like you said, the communication, the things that CP3 is going to teach him, because I think he has a lot of those, he has the skill set. It's just, kind of putting it all together,
Right.
if that makes sense. And I think CP3 can help out with that a lot. We're not saying that he's going to turn into the next Chris Paul, but I think he can definitely teach Tre some things to elevate his play as a point guard with the positive flashes that we've seen, even before the end of the season. Like throughout all the struggles, there were still things that we maintained that Tre Jones did well. He was always a true point guard, had that Duke kind of foundation. But the main thing is when it comes to the defense, because that's the biggest thing whenever it comes to Tre Jones. Like you said, the IQ that he'll learn. But for me, I just look at Stephon Castle is going to be next to him.
True that.
And that goes back to the bench unit. We may even see some rotations where Harrison Barnes is playing off the bench as well at the backup 4. We'll have to see how all those rotations turn out. You never know what injuries are going to pop up that could, mess it right. That could change rotations. But I think overall, the bench unit is going to be better. And when you look at the beginning of last season, it wasn't just the bench unit that was struggling. It was also the starting lineup that was struggling. So the rotations overall for the team got better as the season progressed. And when you factor in adding Stephon Castle, I just really think that's going to make a big impact on top of the things that CP3 is going to teach everybody. And even if it is Mamu, I still think that will also be a better supporting cast, and they'll have some size in the front court as well.
Agreed. And I think Tre's gotten consistent with that floater game, but if he can pick up that elbow fadeaway jumper from Chris Paul, that would be a game changer for him. Because right now he either only has that floater or he's coming off the screen and passing it. Like he really doesn't have anything else to his game. So if he can just get that 15-foot jump shot to fall, it'd be crazy for his development.
Yeah, and same with just being consistent like he was at the end of the season with hitting open threes as well when they give it to him.
For sure.
Easy brings up a question which I think is relevant to this conversation. How many games are they going to sit CP3 to keep him fresh? So I'm going to say that he's going to play around 60 games. So I guess that would be about 20 or so, maybe a little bit less.
I'm gonna go with 70 games he plays,
Okay.
and barring injury, assuming he's healthy, because I really
Right.
don't think he's gonna play that many minutes. Like, I think he'll be 25 a game for the most part, unless, like, we're really in a competitive game going into
Right.
overtime and we just need his veteran presence, but that's my assumption for him because he is trying to prove that he's still a valuable piece to a competitive team.
Yeah, we'll definitely see him rest some games because of his age is the bottom line.
Mhm.
And the other thing that we've got to remember too is this, as we started this conversation, this really kind of is a passing of the torch, if you will, to Stephon Castle after
Right.
this season. So as the season goes on, you might see some more staggered minutes. You might just see some games where maybe they start Stephon, to kind of prepare him for that role next season. And that'll be a game that CP3 sits out and he's kind of on the sideline, giving them advice, all that type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I could totally be wrong there. It could be more than that. I think the point that you hit on the minutes is a really good one as well. I'd be surprised if there's a lot of 38, 35-minute plus
Yeah.
games from Chris Paul this season. Again, especially when we're trying to kind of gradually move Stephon Castle into that role. And we do have Tre Jones still to pick up those minutes, who has starting experience as well.
Sorry, I'm just trying to
No, you're
check.
good.
Oh, okay, I was completely off. I was curious how many minutes a game Jason Kidd was getting his last couple years in the league,
Ooh, that's a
because
good comp.
that's who I'm thinking this is kinda like. Jason Kidd his last
Hmm.
couple years in Dallas and then New York, and he actually went 33, 29, 27 his last 3 years, so but again, different era, I guess. That
But
was
that's kind of what you were saying at the same time, around that 30-minute range.
yeah, yeah, slightly less, and I think in this era.
Right. And that would be around 27,
Yeah,
29.
yeah,
We're
yeah, let's
probably
go with
still
that.
there.
Let's go with that.
RK fan 1012 says dream scenario. I would love to see CP3 be the starting point guard during most of the season, but gets taken over late in the season by Castle. Maybe I'm just high on Stephon. I don't think that it's necessarily that. That's kind of what we just alluded to, RK. I think that's kind of the Spurs blueprint for this
Mhm,
season. Now, obviously, if the Spurs do find themselves in the play in, I think you will see Chris Paul starting in that game and playing
mhm.
minutes for sure. But you're going to see Stephon throughout the season as well. And, as much as we talk about Tre Jones being that kind of certified backup point guard, I think there will be a lot of situations where we'll see Stephon taking the ball up the floor because, again, after this season, he's going to be the point guard of the future as of right now.
100% agreed.